This evening I want to read a passage to you that is very familiar to all of us. It's one of those passages that stories that we heard from the time we were children, and we never forget it because it's quite a spectacular story. Jesus calming the storm. I've been on the Sea of Galilee, and we ran into a little squall while we were on the sea in a boat. Pretty good sized boat, so we weren't afraid of anything. But the Sea of Galilee can become a very turbulent sea in a very short time. It seems that that's what took place here. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, he took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, he rebuked the winds, and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was complete calm. He said to his disciples, "Why were you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Well, I can't remember the first time I ever heard that story, but it's one of those stories that stick with us all through our lives, and the spectacular character of the story is just really a very telling thing to us, I think. Some of the problems in life, some of the catastrophes in life are completely unseen. They're unavoidable many times. And these perils that come to us, sometimes we encounter them and wonder what we can do, and at other times we encounter them and we feel like there's nothing we can do, that we are, shall we say, a victim of circumstances. And life is filled with things like this. The insight that the apostles seemingly should have had, we would suppose, would have given them some sense of security, sense of calm, and all of this sort of thing, because they had seen some of the amazing powers of Jesus just a little while before this. He had healed many sick people. He had performed numerous miracles prior to the time that this took place. And if you read all of the accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke together, you find out that he had done many things that should have really reminded them of his power. And so tonight we want to look at some of these amazing powers of Christ. We'll talk about those. And then we want to see something about the insight into the problems of the personal faith of the apostles. To me, this is a kind of an amazing thing, and I think probably it is to all of us, how the apostles could have responded or reacted the way that they did. And then finally, and this is almost allegorizing the thing, finally, let's talk about some of the cures, let's say, or the solutions to some of the problems, the disturbances, the storms in our own lives. Not from a specific point of view, not from a solution point of view of do this, do this, do this, but at the same time, a principle point of view that will help us to understand a little more clearly the fact that Jesus is with us always, as he said, even unto the end of the world. Well, let's take a look at the setting of this miracle. Now, something we need to understand about the Gospels is the Gospels are generally speaking chronological, but not specifically speaking. For example, I read from Mark. Well, Mark puts this just after the parables at the seaside. But now if you read the account in Matthew, you find out that Matthew places this right after the Sermon on the Mount and before the incident of the parables by the seaside. And then Luke he doesn't put it in either one. He just says, on one day. So he doesn't make any attempt to identify it chronologically at all. As we read the accounts of the life of Christ, we need to keep in mind that the writers are not really interested to a great extent in the chronology. I remember when I first started preaching, I was in Pensacola, Florida. I had just gotten out of college, and I thought to myself, I don't want to lose the studying atmosphere that was created for myself while I was in college. And so I thought, well, why don't I write a harmony of the Gospels for myself? I thought that would be a good way to study and be a good exercise for me. And so I began with the birth of Christ, and I put all these together, the birth of Christ in Matthew, birth of Christ in Luke, and I meshed all of these things together. That was okay. That was not a big problem. And then I came on along to the baptism of Jesus. That was not a problem. But then, before very long, I came to the 5th chapter of Luke about the calling of the disciples. And Luke has it in a different order so far as events are concerned, not just the people, but so far as events are concerned. Luke has it in a different order from Matthew and Mark. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, we have a conflict here. And I was even greener then than I am now. Some people think I'm not green now, I'm just withered. But, that's kind of the way of the thing. But I remember thinking to myself, what is the solution to this problem? Well, it was not a problem at all, really, because we need to understand that that's the nature of the Gospels. They are a gathering of various events, roughly in chronological order, so far as we know, moving on toward the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. But they are not really chronological or biographical accounts of his life. Well, Jesus had done, as I said, he had done a number of miraculous healings and things like this prior to this time. And so we would think that these demonstrations of such great miraculous power would have been something that would really stay with them. And then Jesus had, according to Matthew's account, Jesus had just told some of the great parables that we have in his life. The parable of the sower there in Matthew 13. The parable of the wheat and the weeds, the tares. The parable of the pearl of great price and the hidden treasure in a field. All of those things they had just heard. The crowd was amazed at him. And as I said, prior to this time, he had worked quite a number of miracles. Well, these things took place in the beginning of Christ's ministry. The opposition of the Pharisees was beginning, but it had not come to fruition the way it did a little bit later. He was a very popular man at this time. The crowd followed him. They listened to him gladly. And they admired him, and when he went from place to place, sometime he had a hard time getting away from the crowd. And so he was a very popular man. Now, they get in this little boat. We don't know what size the boat was. It's generally shown as a very small boat, but there was enough room in that boat for Jesus to lie down and go to sleep in the stern. And I have read, I can't find any confirmation of this, but I have read that in some of the boats on the Sea of Galilee, they had a place for an honored guest. And they had it in the stern, and they had it laid out with cushions and all this sort of thing. And that just may very well be the way it was. But now we have this storm. If you look at a relief map, you'll see something there that tells us something about why the storms did what they did. First of all, the Sea of Galilee is a number of hundred feet below sea level. Now, as you look out toward the Mediterranean Sea, there's a valley that comes right there, and the Sea of Galilee is almost in the way of that valley. And so storms and a tempest that arises through the circulation of the wind and all this sort of thing, it emphasizes itself as it comes through that valley. And so the Sea of Galilee many times can just work up a squall in a matter of minutes, and there's no warning for it. You know, a hurricane is out there twisting and turning around in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Pacific Ocean, and we get warnings of it. Well, the storms on the Sea of Galilee, even if they had instruments, would not be warned in this same way. And so it was a terrible thing for you to get caught in a storm on the Sea of Galilee, and it may be something that really happened quite regularly. Well, notice that Jesus exercised his power not just over disease. I mentioned this in the very first lesson that we had in this little group. He had power over nature. It's amazing to me that the people who are claiming to work miracles today and believe in miracles, you never see any of them walking on water. You never see any of them calming a storm. When tragedy happens or something like that, you don't see them able to work a miracle to prevent that tragedy. And yet Jesus was able to calm the sea. I think it's interesting that Mark says this. He says there were other boats with them. I would really like to talk to the people in those other boats. When this storm came up and then all of a sudden it's calm. I don't know whether they knew what happened, they found out what happened, or just what, but Mark tells us that they were there. Jesus had power over nature. Jesus also had power over disease. But he didn't stop and tell the people, now you go home and pray about this and you'll be healed. He healed them on the spot. Those who were sick were healed. They were healed right then and there, and he had this power to do this. We're not very well acquainted with this, but he had power over demons. Those are the underworld, as we would call it sometime, and he was able to cast out demons. He did not exorcise the demons, that is, go through some kind of cantations of some sort and induce the demon to come out. No, he just simply cast the demon out. And so he had this kind of power. And then he had the power also over death. I never have heard a single one of miracle workers today saying that they could raise the dead. That's just not part of things at all. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. He also raised from the dead the son of the widow of Nain. And there was at least one other, a girl who apparently had died. They thought that she had died, and Jesus raised her from the dead. He had this power. Now, why am I saying all of that? I'm saying that really to say this, that the apostles were exposed to all kinds of power that Jesus had, but they had a personal problem with their faith. At the end of the story, Jesus questioned their faith. Why do you have such little faith? On another occasion, he said, "Oh, you of little faith." I've thought so many times of myself and other people who have said the same thing. Oh, I wish I could have been there when Jesus was on the earth and could have seen all of the miracles that he did. How that would be strengthening to my faith. Well, no, probably not. They saw it, and yet their faith was weak. So this is something that we experience. Sometimes my faith is very weak. Sometimes your faith probably is the same way. And in this story, Jesus comments on the weakness of the faith of these men. Even more amazing than this incident is the fact that after the crucifixion, do you remember this? That when they went to the tomb, they expected to find the body of Christ. They did not expect that he would be raised from the dead. They thought that they would find his body. And they talked about who will roll away the stone and all kinds of things like this. But their faith was weak. The first one to arrive at the tomb looked in and said, "Where have you taken him? Where have you moved him to?" Isn't it interesting that the Jewish, the Pharisees, the Jewish religious leaders went to Pilate and said, give us a guard at the tomb, because we remember this man said, I will rise from the dead. It seemed that they believed in that possibility, or they understood what he was saying anyway, and they wanted a guard there to be sure that the disciples didn't come and steal the body away. And yet the apostles themselves, it seems that they didn't understand it. Faith is just such a strange thing for us sometimes. And when we think our faith is strong, maybe it is not as strong as we thought it was. This brings up the idea of doubts. Do you ever have any doubts about your faith? Everybody please say yes. There's nothing wrong with having doubts, provided we are willing to deal with those doubts from a point of view of Scripture. I remember an individual who began having doubts, and he read and read and read. He lived in Georgia, and he was a member of a congregation that I had been preaching for in Pensacola, Florida. And this young man was a leader of the youth group, and he was about 15 years old himself. He was very studious about the Bible, and then he went away to college, and he came back, and he was a journalist. And some of the other journalists kind of mocked his faith. And the first thing you know, he began reading and reading and reading atheistic books. Books that denied the existence of God and things like this. And then when he came to Georgia at the time of the death of his father, when he came to Georgia, his mother called me and said, Jack, would you come and talk with Bill? And then she told me about this. So Bill and I went off in the car, and we sat down and we talked for a long time. And he told me this story. He said, you know, I read all these things, and then I went to some of the church people, and they said, oh, that's a bunch of foolishness, and that's about all they said. You see, when we have doubts, we need to look at both sides of an issue, not just at the side that creates the doubts. And so many people have lost their faith because they began doubting, but then they didn't deal with the doubts from a point of view of strengthening my faith, strengthening our faith. And so doubts are not bad in and of themselves, but a refusal to face the doubts and try to solve the difficulties, that is problematic. Well, what tends to strengthen our faith? The story of Jesus calming the seas seems to me comes back to a great extent to this idea that their faith is really the object of this story. The faith of the apostles is certainly the power of Christ, but the faith of the apostles and the lack of that faith. So what helps us in developing a stronger faith? One of the great helps to me personally is worship. I mentioned to you when I had my nosebleeds, which that's all a part of the past now, but I mentioned to you how strange it felt to know that the people of God were together worshiping, and I couldn't be there. I had to be by myself. And I've never really experienced this in exactly this way. But there was such a vacuum there. I think one of the things that we miss is the value of worship. Too much of the time, it has become an ordinance that we follow. It's become a commandment that we obey. It has become something, well, this is required. It isn't that it's required. It is that we have the great privilege of praising God together, of praying together, of having fellowship, partnership with one another. And so far as I'm concerned, this is one of the things that deepens my faith. Another thing that deepens our faith is for us to be actively engaged in the work of the church. And I know some people who say, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm not talented. I can't get up before a crowd. I can't teach. I can't do this. I can't do that. Oh, there are all kinds of things. That's the reason that I sent out this letter, is because there are all kinds of things that we can do that we might think of as kind of behind the scenes. They're kind of mechanical things. They don't require you to get up in front of anybody. If you're embarrassed about that or you can't do that well, that's perfectly all right. There are a whole lot of things that you can do. And the more we do in the work of the church, the stronger our faith becomes. One reason being, I know that I am contributing not of my money, but of myself. I'm contributing of myself to the congregation and to its welfare. And I was, as I mentioned to you at our lunch today, I couldn't help but think of that as I was going over this lesson just before we came to worship. And I just thought of the fact that the fellowship that we had, it was really wonderful. It just really was. We had a lot of fun. There was a lot of humor. But I looked around there and I said, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. Isn't it wonderful to be together, eat together, and enjoy the presence of each other? And then I thought of the meaning of this word, fellowship. It's from a Greek word, koinonia. And the Greek word simply means a partnership. It doesn't mean just the joy of a social occasion, but it means a partnership. When James and John were fishermen and they were working together, it said they were partners with each other. Koinonia is the word that's used there. They were partners with each other. That word is translated elsewhere as fellowship. They were partners, though. We need to feel a partnership between ourselves and the other Christians in the congregation. This is a strong builder, I think, of our faith. Then, as you've heard me say 1,373 times, I counted them, we build our faith through intense Bible study, personally, together, whatever it might be, but intense Bible study, not just reading the Bible every day. That's a fine thing to do, and I'm not disparaging that at all, but we need to sit down and really hard down study it sometime, and that is a faith builder in a very in a very real sort of way. Then this is strictly in the realm of opinion, but I'm going to offer it. I think a part of building my faith is for me to learn to prioritize my life. Prioritize it. These are the A things. These are the essential things I must do. What are they? Well, you know, we can all list those things that are absolutely essential. I've got to eat. I've got to sleep. There are various things that are essential. Why not put Bible study into the essential things, not into the B category of things that are important but not urgent, and in the C category of things that I want to do that are unimportant? Well, if we prioritize our lives, we find out we've got a whole lot more time than we thought we had. We get things done so much better. And the big thing about this is that if we prioritize our lives with a study of the Word, activity in the congregation, work for the church, and things like that, put them in the A category, then we find out that these things can really build our faith. Well, there are, of course, a number of things that weaken our faith. One of them is, maybe I ought to say not just one, but maybe 4 or 5, to neglect the things that I just mentioned. That weakens our faith. When we fail to do those things, it weakens our faith. So let's take a look now for just in just a brief sort of way. Let's take a look at the sort of the allegorizing of this story. When you receive the announcement in your email about the sermon topics and so forth, I had the storm. There was no hope, despair, and then there's the peace. And one is a picture of turmoil and the other is a picture of calm. In the lives of all of us, there are times of turmoil. There are times of storm. What am I going to do about those things? How are they going to affect me? Well, there's some of them that I can't change. Back in 1999, my wife died. I couldn't change that. I had to live with that. That was a horrible thing for me to experience, and anybody who has experienced that knows that that is really a horrible thing. But I have to come to grips with the fact that there are things in life, whether it's a death, whether it's the loss of a job, whatever it might be, there are things in life sometimes that are irreversible. I can't change. So I can worry, and wonder, but I still can't change it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to have to adjust my life so that I can learn to live with that. And so when a person loses a job, let's say, he can go home and sit and not do anything and just worry about the fact that he's lost his job. Or he can get up and try to do something about it. And when we seek solutions to our spiritual problems, it's very much the same way. When we seek solutions, whether we find the solution we really want or whether we find out, hey, I've got to learn to live with this. I can't solve it. I can't change it. Then I become equipped to do that very thing. It is not an easy thing. It's very hard. It's very difficult. But I need to recognize the fact that problems change. Problems come and problems go. I want to read to you a statement that James said about how we use prayer. In some ways, this statement is it's a little bit scary, to be perfectly honest. It's a little bit scary to me sometimes. He began by saying, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Well, isn't there some other way to develop perseverance than instead of putting me through this trial, this tribulation? Well, he said, that's the way we ought to view these things. View it with a positive attitude. Say, yes, this is a testing of my faith, but if I will allow it to do so, it will build perseverance in my life. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may become complete and mature. Well, trials and tribulations, problems in my life, they can be used as stepping stones to greater spiritual maturity. That's what James is telling us. Or we can use those things as stumbling blocks, and they will haunt us for a long, long time. And so he says you become mature and complete, lacking in nothing. But then he said, now if you lack wisdom, ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But, here's the part I don't like, okay? But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt. Because he who doubts is like the waves of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, and he's unstable in all that he does. there are some things that I wish that was not in there, because that gets on the inside of me. When I pray, is faith a part of that prayer? Or am I saying to myself well, God never has helped me with this anyway, so I don't think he's going to help me with it again. No, that isn't the idea. Christians need to use faith, need to have faith in an optimistic way, so that we see whether God answers it the way I want him to or not is not the point. God will answer my prayer. It may be different from what I asked. It may be no. It may be yes, but not quite right, not quite now. It may be if. And there are all kinds of things here about answering prayer, about how God answers our prayers. But God answers all of our prayers. Every prayer that we pray, God answers it. Sometimes, like I say, he says no. Well, sometimes he also says, I want you to work on this yourself, Jack. Jack, I want you to try to solve this problem, because that'll do two or three things for you. Number one, it will help solve the problem. And number two, it will help build your faith. And so there are all sorts of things like this where faith plays an important role. Well, there are circumstances that I can't control, though. I was talking about circumstances that I have some control over. I can do something about them. The Lord can do something. It's not like raising the dead. It isn't that at all. But now there are some things that I can't control. Let me not be discouraged over those things. Let me face them and move on. The economy, I don't know about you, but there's not a thing in the world that I can do about world economy. I don't have that power. And I don't think anybody here has that power either. We can't do anything about the world economy, but it's affecting all of us. And so what are we going to do? We're going to have to learn to live with a bad economy. If you're a politician and you lose your job, or if you're a voter and the wrong man is elected or wrong woman is elected, we've got to live with that, folks. That doesn't mean don't pray about it, but it does mean we have to live with it. And so faith plays such an important role in this. We have to recognize that God will stand with us. We will stand with God. We might not like the outcome. We might have to live with an outcome that we do not enjoy. But faith says you can put up with it. And so James begins this statement by consider it all joy, my brothers, when you face trials. And so there can be a positive effect of the trials and the tribulations, the disappointments, the discouragements, and the things that I feel like I can't solve. There still can be joy in the Christian life, because God can work with us in reference to this and make us better people as a result. A lack of faith of the apostles drew a condemnation from Christ. I wonder if I'd been in that boat. I wonder where I would have been. I would probably have been saying the same thing that the apostles said. Save us, Lord, we're going to drown. And I would probably have been a part of the rebuke of Christ, where he said, where is your faith, Jack? Oh, you of little faith. So we have to live in a way where we put our whole life into the hands of Christ, into the hand of God, knowing that he will treat us with love and compassion. And so in our own personal lives, he will say to us, like he said to the waves, peace, be still. And the anxiety of my life can be relieved by that simple statement of Christ.